Welcome back to Conversation with Cardinal Dolan. I'm Monsignor Jim Vaughn, and now joining us from the Diocese of Syracuse is Deacon Nathan Gunn. He's here to discuss his new book, Lead Like Mary. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Monsignor.
It's like the bakery out there. Everybody's got a number. They're coming in.
Nathan, you are that man. Remember Nathan said that to David?
Yes.
You are that man. We've talked to Nathan Gunn before.
Of course.
Because he's a great, he's a deacon, an ordained deacon, but a great leader in what I'd call evangelical Catholicism. And really into the new evangelization, and it's good you're with Young Life. But I got to tell you, you are Nathan the Prophet today, what we invited you on, because it's the month of May.
Of course.
Dedicated to the Blessed Mother. Nathan Gunn has a fine new book called Lead Like Mary. You see, this is sort of unique to me, that's what caught my attention. You're really holding her up as a model of leadership.
Absolutely.
You don't really usually think of that, do you, Father?
No, yeah.
You think of her as a model for motherhood, discipleship, obedience, humility, the virtues, but leadership. How did you come upon that one?
Well, simply put, you know, I've had the privilege to work with a lot of great people, a lot of great leaders in ministry. As you would know, just as you just had Sister on, many of them are women. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself in a lot of conference
Plus
rooms.
you're married to a great one.
Well, yes. Yeah, lead like Tammy, honestly.
Yeah.
But we would go to conferences together, my staff, whatever, and trainings, and most of them would use, of course, the Apostle Peter, or the fisherman Peter as their example. Because
Or St. Joseph.
Or
maybe,
St. Joseph,
yeah.
right? Because they're very accessible to us. And Mary, especially because some of the beautiful dogmatic realities about her, rightfully is sort of in another class, right? But then we'd leave these conferences, and I'd talk to the women, and I could tell that it would, you know, it was a step for them to get to relate to such these figures, these biblical figures. And so eventually I finally said, well, let's find a woman in the Bible that we could shape your leadership after, and some of the more maternal or feminine aspects of your leadership. Well, who better?
Who better?
And we began to study the gospel passages, and all of a sudden I realized, you know, honestly, in my own life, I need the Holy Mother to impart these things into my own ministry, and that the type of tenderness, the type of...
We found, Monsignor, you'd agree with me, we usually didn't think of the Blessed Mother as a leader, and I think somebody said to me, well, Nathan, Deacon Nathan Gunn here, has helped rescue Mary from kind of a caricature as this meek in the corner subservient woman. Now, if we want to understand meekness and subservience properly, you bet she is.
Absolutely.
But she wasn't this shrinking violet.
No.
So you say, no, she was a pretty luminous, a robust leader.
Think of her in Cana. Right? Now, she's in a village that's many miles from her home. She somehow has been invited, so she's known. She has influence. When she finds out there's a problem, they come to her with the problem, right? Which is this terrible cultural issue. And she says to her son, there's no wine. And Jesus says, listen, Mom, it's an interesting conversation. I'm not really going to do anything about that right now. And she completely ignores him, which is profound. And then does what? She gets the waitstaff. And the interesting thing is, the waitstaff knows Mary of Nazareth well enough that they do what she says. So here she is displaying herself having influence.
She's somewhat of a formidable woman.
And we see that all the way, not only to the cross, but then beyond in the early church. During this, you know, we're about to have, of course, the Feast of the Assumption, and then we had the 10 days of waiting, right?
And Pentecost.
Right? And so during that 10 days, what does it say in the book of Acts? That Mary and the women joined the apostles for prayer in the upper room. Well, that's a profound addition to their prayer group. And during that 10 days, who do you think was the most influential, right? I mean, I'm sure Peter was, and James and John, right? But when they began to talk about what they ought to do, what's Mary's last word to us in the scriptures?
You got it.
Do whatever my son has told you to do. Well, he told us to wait. So we're going to wait. And that's what moms do. Great moms, right? They tell you,
believe it.
You point your kids to Jesus, and you say, wait until Jesus tells you to do something, and we're going to do what he says.
Or don't do what Jesus tells you not to do.
Exactly.
The opposite as well. It's interesting, and I think if I remember in the book, you go through some of the gospel passages, some of the feast days, correct?
And so, you know, for me, the most explosive moment is her introduction. right? When Gabriel comes in and
The Annunciation.
yeah, and declares who she is, this idea of being full of grace. And from there, it's the idea that everything that this person did throughout her entire being, her entire life, was this idea, this essence that was being poured out. She's incapable of doing anything that isn't grace-filled. And looking into that, well, that's the reality of our baptism. We ought to live into that identity, right? That by virtue of our baptism, and of course then the sacrament of reconciliation, and then the sacramental life, we're able to live that way. Like you just said, a year of grace. Wouldn't it be great if we could live a year of grace? Well, that's what Mary was. She was full of grace. She could do nothing else but that.
Yeah.
And so, in my understanding of it, the rest of the narratives throughout the Gospels, and then later even her dogmatic realities, they stem from that beginning point of her Immaculate Conception, and then, of course, being described as full of grace.
I like the whole analogy of Mary as the new Eve. I forget if you get into that or not. That's she kind of rewound what God intended from the beginning in Adam and Eve, and they blew it. So he said, okay, another chance. I'll have a second Adam and a second Eve. And that, of course, was Jesus and Mary.
Yeah, of course.
She's a new Eve, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Magnificat, too, is not exactly the prayer of a shrinking violet, right?
No, and it's deeply rooted in the prayers of Hannah.
Yeah.
Sure it is.
And there's tremendous amount of prefiguration there. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So, she's been... if somebody were to ask me how I've interacted with this as a leader personally, I'd say the first maybe 15 years of my life, I really fashioned myself after Peter. I was kind of pig-headed and stubborn, but went after the
Tammy
Lord.
told me that.
But because of our Holy Mother, but not only just because of her, because of these passages and because of the women that have shown me leadership, I'd say the last 10 years, there's been a different side, which has been, I think, closer to hers. And that's affected me in great ways.
Good.
Yeah.
Keep up the good work. Deacon Nathan Gunn.
Congratulations.
Lead
Thank you so much.
Like Mary, a biblical primer on Marian leadership. Who put it out? Nathan?
Amazon.
Amazon. You got it, folks? You won't be disappointed.
Stick around. We'll be right back.